to reduce the revenue expenditure, whatever marginal, it is. But the point here is that there is a conscious effort to increase or improve the quality of expenditure. And this in turn is also reflected in the effective capital expenditure, which is now close to 13.7, which was 10.5 in the earlier. So the point in terms of expenditure side is that there is a concerted effort in terms of improving the quality of expenditure, while on the revenue side, we find that the assumptions in terms of tax buoyancy seems to be fairly reasonable. So when we look at so when we look at the expenditure, just a very, very high level breakup, we find that, of course, interest payments are high. Subsidies, there is an attempt to reduce subsidies. Defense, marginal increase, and I'll come to that in a minute. Transport is the key. And that, I think, is going to be the kind of a growth driver. And that is where the government is banking in terms of growth. Okay. Now, defense slightly higher because there is higher revenue spending on defense. There is no major capital spending that is going to come. When we look at food storage and warehousing, higher food subsidy requirement is what is really pushing that extra, that incremental or delta in terms of expenditure. Pensions, it is again getting this whole thing, one rank, one pension scheme, out of all the confusions. Capital outlays. There was some mention about not increasing the rolling stock and track renewals. No, it is higher provisioning for rolling stocks and track renewals. Of course, there is an expenditure earmarked for stations. So on the whole, then we find that the expenditure is expected to create multipliers, and that would actually increase consumption as well as increase demand in the economy. But there is something that has really confused me a little in this budget, and that is the role of FCI. Because if you look at the corrections as far as the subsidies are concerned, well, there is a cut in the estimated spending on food and fertilizer subsidies. But if you look at the statement 25 of the expenditure profile of the budget, we see two things. One, FCI is provisioned to borrow 15,000 crores in the ongoing financial year. Two, for 23-24, FCI will again borrow another 40,000 crores through external commercial borrowings and another 1.05 lakh crores through others, mostly through NSSF. So there is a slight confusion here, and I've been trying to get some clarity on this, talking to Finance Ministry officials, but yet to get the real picture as far as this FCI remark is concerned. But we thought that this is now clarified in the previous budgets as to where FCI's borrowings would come and things of that sort. But here we find perhaps a step in terms of going back to the old systems. So that's something which is slightly uncomfortable as far as the expenditure side is concerned. So what are the expected growth drivers of the budget? Well, credit dispersal, yes. We find that there is a slight improvement in credit dispersal, and we hope that it would actually pick up more. There is also a kind of an expectation that the capital investment cycle will unfold, and that will actually result in higher or increased investments. Why? Because there is, as the economic survey points out, there is a strengthening of the balance sheets of both corporates as well as banking sectors. So we don't have the twin balance sheet problems anymore. Now, major drivers of growth, well, public digital platforms, PM Gati Shakti, which is again in terms of physical infrastructure, national logistics policy. PLIs should kick in at some point. Maybe too early to assess PLIs, but then I think it is expected that PLIs might also kick in. What are the risks? I think there are two important risks that we need to keep in mind. One, well, I think there is a challenge to the macroeconomic stability because of external pressures. And this has been highlighted by the government itself and various commentators. So foreign capital inflows is something which we might be really pragmatic about. And there are concerns about elevated energy prices. Well, at the moment, it is not very high, but then it is fluctuating. Now, trade balance is an area where we might actually be looking very carefully, because a lot of trade partners or major trade partners of India in the West are having very low levels of demand at the moment. So export growth rate in terms of more exports to those regions might not be a very realistic assumption to make. Yeah. But then the very crucial domestic factor that we need to think in is the revival of private investment. And I think there is an often used cliche here that we are seeing green shoots of revival. Perhaps that green shoots or those green shoots now should actually grow up, and there should be more private investments that could come in. And I think budget signals certain right things in terms of reviving private investment. So there are two risks which I would say. One is the international or global risk in terms of the global trade scenario. Second is the domestic, that is related to private investments. And unless and until private investments stop, all these multiplier effects that we are talking about might not be kicked in the economy. Okay. Now, let me conclude by two very brief comments on what has been the political strategy and the policy strategy of this budget. Well, I would say there will be three possibilities for an election year budget. One, the easy way to loosen the fisc, and then increase populistic spending and make sure that you are trying or putting your level best to come back to power again. And that is a lot of welfare spending might come within the ambit of such a strategy. Second is a strategy of what I would call as banking on the laurels. That is, you have been able to really project India as a growing economy. And if you recollect the pre-budget press conferences as well as the beginning of the budget speech was an attempt in terms of, we are getting the right signals from global institutions kind of an approach. And we have an earlier kind of an experience of that, projecting India shining as a campaign and going for elections. But the third is a very interesting kind of a strategy, that is under-promising and over-delivering. And to me, this is trying to do the third. Yeah, there are no big promises, but there is a kind of an attempt to over-deliver, both in terms of what the government calls as ease of doing business as well as ease of living. Yeah. And whether this under-promising and over-delivering strategy would work or not, without much of a cost to the fisc, is something which we will have to wait and see. So broadly, I would say the political strategy is one in terms of not loosening the fisc, which the government has been very conscious, but an attempt to under-promise and over-deliver. Finally, let me wrap up with what was the challenge and what is the continuing challenge as far as policy making is concerned in the present scenario. Well, it's very straightforward that there are multiple cross currents at play. The impact of the pandemic and the war has meant that emerging markets are sizable 4 to 5% below their pre-pandemic potential growth path. And we know that if we had a plot of the growth trajectory based on previous trend, and if we have one now, we are below that. There's no doubt about that. Now, even a kind of a relatively soft landing scenario, global growth is expected to slow to 1.7% next year from 3% this year. And that is a very reasonable kind of a projection to have. So there is a large two-sided uncertainty. And with this large two-sided uncertainty, optimality needs to be embedded in the policy frameworks, because policies need to quickly respond to either direction. And the classic case is in terms of perhaps an emergency action to increase the allocation for MNREGA. Yeah, please remember it's a demand-driven kind of a program. So if the demand is high, we really need to increase the allocation for that. So we need nimbleness as far as policy is concerned. And it will also be very, very challenging to have what we call as a right size policy because of this elevated uncertainty. So I would say the first kind of a guiding principle is a kind of an optimality and nimbleness. And the second guiding principle under this present environment is, if you are in doubt, err on a side of type 1 error. And type 1 error, I would say, as doing too much, rather than type 2 error, where I would say, as doing too little. Perhaps the government is trying to do too much in terms of capital investments and higher capex outlays. But when you are in doubt in terms of the global economic scenario, I think it would be better if the government err on the type 1 error of doing too much. Why? Because if policy is deemed to over tighten, then it can be quickly and sharply reversed. But if it is too loose in terms of more populist welfare spendings, then it will be very difficult for us to get back to a fiscal deficit number and a debt scenario which are sustainable. So the cost of such policy errors would be very high, and it is asymmetric. Given this context, I think the present budget has attempted to strike a balance between spending and fiscal prudence. I would stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Suresh Babu. May I request Professor Lekha Chakrabarti to speak, please.
Thank you so much. Many of the points related to the fiscal arithmetic is already preempted. So those portions I am not, reinventing the wheel. My focus is on the budget credibility. Over the years, our concern was that there is no budget credibility in India. In terms of the fiscal marksmanship, when the analysis is done, we have done an analysis in NIPFP with Pinaki. And in that analysis, many of the macro fiscal parameters at the union government level, the fiscal marksmanship was affected, or the budgetary forecasting errors happened, not due to randomness, but due to the bias of the policy maker. So there was a concern for the revisions in the assumptions and the models to arrive at the right fiscal marksmanship. But in this budget, as Professor Govindarao rightly pointed out, there is no case of that significant deviation in the tax projections. Rather, the tax projections were very modest and very realistic, but we don't know whether we are not targeting at an optimum level or we are doing it below that optimum target. But in terms of the fiscal risk calculation, this is going to help, because our revised estimates or the actuals will be much more than what we anticipate now as projections or budget estimates. So that's a way the budget credibility, that's a major concern of the government, and they are trying to work it out. Another important thing I noticed in the budget related to the credibility is there is no major announcement related to improving the fiscal space through promising disinvestment proceeds. And we have seen over the years that the deviation between budget estimates and actual or the revised estimates that happened, mainly in this disinvestment proceeds. So asset monetization, increasing the fiscal space through disinvestment, such promises were not given in this budget. So there was a very brilliant way in which the budget credibility issues were tackled. Otherwise, the significant deviation between the budget estimates and the revised estimates, that revenue foregone or the fiscal space foregone, there's got its own implications in the way we design the spending, because the revenue stability is the base for the expenditure design. So that was a concern. So it is corrected a little bit. But again, fiscal deficit mounted to more than 9% of GDP during the pandemic period. It was not exactly due to the new expenditure design, but we believe that fiscal transparency, budget transparency is important, and a component which we called as OBB was incorporated into this realm of fiscal deficit. But right now, there is a reversal in that. So I thought that the fiscal transparency or the budget transparency that has happened in the time of pandemic, that was the right time to hit such policies. But I thought that there won't be any reversal in that. Now, the policy coordination. Today, the MPC announcement has come. Of course, the monetary policy corridor, that's symmetrical. We have our repo rate now at 6.5, and the SDF, it's 6.25. The floor is not reverse repo, it's redundant. Now it's SDF, and the MSF is 6.75. Okay, that's fine. Thinking that the inflation can be entirely contained by the new monetary policy framework, or the inflation targeting, or the price stability is the sole concern of only the RBI. But given that, the supply side shocks, and of course, this inflation is not a strictly monetary phenomenon in the context of India. So what is that in the budget when inflation hurts poor? So those kind of, strict policy coordination, when I look into that, inflation is strictly in the realm of RBI, and we will focus on economic growth. So that's the way the narrative is coming. So we have seen that, a series of interest rate hikes happened. Of course, that needs to be done, because otherwise we fear capital flight, and our capital account deficit is widening to more than 4%. So we were conveniently financing that with the capital flows, but now the capital is getting flighty because of the Western world. The Fed is increasing their interest rates. So we need to go hawkish in terms of interest rates. So there is no call over there. There's a reversal in the sequence of priority of the RBI, thinking that the fiscal policy remains accommodative. That's where there's a problem, because there is a conflict of interest over here. As in, interest rate is mounting. Of course, you're focusing on interest rate targeting or inflation targeting, but the cost of the borrowing, the public debt management, that's becoming difficult. If the fiscal policy needs to be kept accommodative with high fiscal deficit and high debt, and articulating that it is connected to, increasing the capex, and through that we will crowd in private investment and the economic growth recovery happens. So this is the narrative and the policy coordination that's happening right now, which I have a concern. Now, coming to beyond GDP, there was an emphasis on the beyond GDP paradigm in this budget, but of course, whether it is backed by allocations or not, we need to look into. There was an emphasis, of course, in terms of the populist measures or the electoral promises. There were no freebies. The extension of that food security for next 1 year, that is welcome. Then there was announcements related to the women's empowerment, connecting it to the self-help groups, and again that access to credit and the infusion of the credit through the peer monitoring models. All these things are welcome, and a focus on climate change commitments. And when Pinaki was our director, we did a study with the ministry to come up with an estimate of the public expenditure requirements for the first adaptation communication of India. So national adaptation communication is now on board, the first national adaptation communication, and we have done an estimate for this climate change commitments related to that. But having said that, in the international forum, the articulation went ahead with just transition without focusing on the energy poverty related issues. Now, coming back to our budget, we have also, in the Department of Petroleum, of course, the allocation has gone up, but that is to support, oil companies. But when I look into the energy poverty issues, when the last time when the government was, voted back to the power by running this last mile, by providing energy infrastructure in gender budgeting, by providing, clean fuel for the women in the low income households. So such policies were not given adequate importance in this. When I look into that prima facie gender neutral petroleum, to look into these kind of energy poverty issues, that was not given adequate emphasis now. So these are matters of concern. So if the policy coordination is that, given the geopolitical uncertainties, if the RBI is focusing on tackling inflation, and of course we are into negative interest rate regime. So on one side, the fiscal policy speaks about the access to the credit by providing the digital infrastructure. So against the backdrop of G20, in the first 1 minute of the speech, Finance Minister announced about her commitment to the digital infrastructure. So that's welcome. The access to credit is welcome. When we compare the cost of credit versus access to credit, the poor always look for that access to the credit. So that's welcome. But this narrative of RBI looking into inflation, fiscal policy will look into economic growth recovery process, that's going to be a little tricky, because inflation hurts poor and there should be more fiscal measures to support the poor from inflation. But all we have seen is the announcement related to the tax side, where a very insignificant segment of Indian population will be having the benefit of the tax related thing. And as Professor Govind Rao always mentioned, we cannot use the tax handles to touch the inequalities issues or the poverty issues. It has to be through the expenditure. But that kind of an articulation was absent in this budget. So I stop here and look forward to questions and answers, and I will come again. Thank you so much.
Yes, Dr.
You sit here. Okay. Please.
So we can't hear you. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Can you hear? A distinguished colleague of mine, a good friend, many of you would know him, Dr. Ajit Ghosh, who passed away 2 weeks ago. Ajit was an erudite scholar, a compassionate colleague, and a person with a great deal of passion for the Indian economy and the employment situation, and has written extensively about these topics. And his passing is a matter of deep sorrow. I just wanted to bring it to your attention. My brief here is to depart from the familiar figures on the budget and to talk to you about the employment dimensions of the new budget. And that's something one has got to be very skeptical about. And I'm glad that we have new entrants into that fraternity of professional skeptics, the recent one being Professor Nagaraj. The points I want to bring to your attention in relation to what have been said in the budget speech, and also the economic survey. There are some issues I wish to bring to your attention, because we get this glossy picture of being there at the threshold of an era of eternal bliss, that is the Amrit Kal. There's no better translation for that. And there are a number of premises listed by the Honorable Finance Minister. There are important premises. One, a rising labor force participation, especially of women. And then we have declining urban unemployment rate. Third, we have a faster growth of formal employment indicated by rising registration of employee provident fund schemes, and then the employment guarantee schemes have provided jobs in rural areas and opportunities for income generation of households and for them to diversify their incomes. As much as I would love to believe in these claims, even wishfully hope that they become reality in the nearest foreseeable future, the evidence before us is not very convincing. I will discuss some facts and figures with minimal reference to the descriptive data and the concepts and measures underlying them. Some concepts are unavoidable, like the labor force participation rate, the worker population ratio, the unemployment rate, the usual status concept, the weekly status concept, disaggregation of the entire labor force based on their economic status. We have got to come back to these at odd intervals. I won't try to bore you with the figures, but then let me tell you the important things which we should understand, that is about the labor force participation rate, which is essentially a proportion of the employed and the unemployed together in the total labor force, in the total population. And then we have what's called the worker population ratio, that is the proportion of the employed in the entire population, generally of that specified age group. And then we disaggregate population according to gender and based on their residence in rural and urban areas. Here the noticing an increase of labor force participation rate and worker population ratio for men and women in rural and urban areas, thereby a decline of the unemployment rates as mentioned in both the economic survey and in the budget. The figures, they happen for three reasons. Let me mention very briefly. The figures refer to population of all age groups, which should not be the right measure. We should use it always with reference to the specified working age groups. Secondly, there's a disproportionate increase of the denominator, which can vitiate the figures. When the denominator, that is the labor force participation, increases, the unemployment rate has a tendency to decline because it's purely a mathematical relationship. And then we use the usual status concept, which has a tedious recall period, making the results very, very suspect. Now, a shorter reference week, that is the weekly status, for the age group 15 years plus, give more reasonable estimates. Some figures from 2018-19 to 2020-21, I'm afraid I've got to repeat them. One, labor force participation of men increased from 76% to 77% in rural and urban rural areas, but they stayed at 74% in urban areas. These are between the two terminal years. Labor force participation of women increased in rural areas from 23 to 30%. In urban areas, they increased from 20 to 22%. Worker population ratio, that is the employed out of population of the relevant age group, increased from 69 to 71 in rural areas and stayed at 67% in urban areas. For women, they increased from 21 to 29 in rural areas and 17 to 19 in urban areas. The unemployment rate of men, by the way, based on the age-specific estimates, decreased from 9 to 7% in rural areas, stayed at 9% in urban areas. Urban unemployment rate of women decreased from 7 to 5% in rural areas, but stayed at 12% in urban areas. there is nothing spectacular or to be proud of in these estimates. The pandemic years actually made them worse. We should be concerned about unemployment rates in urban areas because economic growth, wherever, whenever it happened, has always been associated with huge migratory movements of people to the urban area. So the urban unemployment rates are crucial. And the fact of the matter is we are yet to make any breakthrough by way of any significant reduction there. More disturbingly, self-employed men and women increased from 52 to 56% of the workforce. Regular wage employees, we ought to be concerned about them, declined from 24 to 21%, and casual workers, 24 to 23%. These are not, let me repeat, positive developments. Significant income differentials exist between the self-employed and the regularly paid. And the same goes for the casually employed workers. There's a great deal of correspondence between the incomes of the self-employed and the casually paid in the lower rungs of the workforce. During the 4 quarters of what we call the periodic labor force survey, which has been there in operation from 2017, 18 onwards, total employment, this is during the PLFS, the 4 quarters of 2021-22, the total employment declined in most industries where regularly paid workers dominate, notably manufacturing, construction, trade, transport, hospitality, financial services. Likewise, but then by the way, there are some exceptions in service industries of skilled workers, including health, education, IT and business processing. There have been increases in the paid labor force. The developments so far, I mean, where we hope to increase employment in the traditionally labor-intensive industries, the developments have ominous implications for income distribution among the employed. The growth of formal employment indicated through EPFO, that is Employees Provident Fund Organization registrations, raises more questions than answers. Economic survey claims that EPFO data indicates a consistent increase of payroll additions as economic activities have picked up. Average monthly subscribers added under the EPFO increased from 0.9 million in April, November, 2021 to 1.3 million. Point I'm trying to bring to your attention is not spectacular increases. But then there is an analyst, very distinguished, Mahesh Vyas, with a great deal of understanding of the economy. He has argued that the 46.3 million contributing members of EPFO in 2021 is in 2022 is much lower than the 48.9 million contributing members in the pre-pandemic years. Evidently, formal sector employment measured through EPFO contributions had not recovered to the pre-pandemic level. It has only declined by 5%. Then the worst offense, the EPFO periodically revises the monthly estimates downwardly, and that has not been reported in the economic survey. The annual estimates of the EPFO submitted to the Parliament reveal that the contributing establishments of the PPFO, I'm talking about the formal sector, they have declined from 660,000 in 2019-20 to 591,000 in 2021. They have shrunk by a massive 10% during the 2 years. All these basically to bring to your attention that the optimistic scenario we are trying to present is not there as yet. But then, like you, I do hope we turn the corner and visible improvements take place in our formal sector employment. The final point about a risible reduction in the allocation for MGN, the Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Program, many people have referred to, from 89,000 crores in the revised estimate to 60,000 crores in the proposed budget. Ostensible reason is there has been normalization of the rural economy with better employment opportunities due to strong economic growth and all those propitious conditions. Fact of the matter is, NREGA is not a demand-led program. It's a supply-induced program taking care of unemployment and poverty situation in the countryside, to which it has contributed remarkably. Now, it's that amount now being reduced by 1/3 in the current budget. The promised program, it promised 100 days of employment in rural areas, but has never been effective at creating more than 40 to 50% of the capacity promised. New allocation will further reduce the days of work available after paying for liabilities of the previous financial year. The program, the amount available would be something like 50,000 crores, which will generate something like 17 days of work per household. And even the World Bank has recommended something like 1.7% of the GDP should be spent on the program. But right now, our expenditure is 0.2%. What I would like to bring to your attention is there has been a collective failure. It's not just the center government. Every state involved in it has grossly failed in extending the spread and depth of the program. We have, there are two aspects which, by the way, deserve close attention. We have moved away from asset creation to enhancing individual household income. That is, income generated, the work generated through works in individuals' land has increased from 16% of the total employment under the NREGA program to 73% in financial year 22, which means it's literally being outsourced to individual households. There is no concerted effort to build community assets for which you need to spend on materials, and we haven't done it as yet. With the net result, individuals are benefiting from the NREGA program. Secondly, there's a rising share of women in NREGA schemes. It's a shift which is welcome, since it becomes the biggest source of income, independent income to women in rural areas. But then the obverse of it is that there are many states in South India, Kerala is a clear case, where women account for something like 90% of the total jobs. And in many South Indian states too, there is a visible presence of women in NREGA employment. This is a supply-induced presence, and it has a tendency to widen the disparity, the gender disparity in wages. And in many of the northern Indian states, because of the prevalence of lower wage rate, men come into labor force, but then we are reaching a stage, the wages on offer are simply not attractive. That's why it's being given over to the private sector. Finally, the collective failure to provide means of a dignified life to people at the lower end of the income distribution has had adverse effects on the level of wages in rural areas. The economic survey, by the way, makes a rare concession that there has been a fall in real wages in rural areas. But then that fall has had longer antecedents. I worked on the subject, and from 1916 onwards, it has been consistently, the wages in rural areas have been consistently declining in most Indian states, particularly high in the migrant receiving states like Kerala. And no, decelerating, let me say. Well, actually from 16 onward, it has been declining. From take into account a longer period of time, we can see a conspicuous increase, but it has been declining from 2016 onwards. And that's something to be really worried about. It only shows that the reserve army of labor, comprising of youthful migrants and women workers, are kept poor at the margins. The policy community has got to take on board the problem of raising, the question of raising their income. And that means redistributive transfers, which can raise the wage rate and also the social security benefits, which in turn would assure a kind of a floor, wage floor. And that's where I think the policy community should turn their attention, and the budget makers too should give greater attention to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jose. Now we have Professor T. Narayana, former Director of GIFT.
A very good afternoon, Mr. Chandrasekhar, my friends and students. Let me come down to the micro, some particular sector. I'm going to focus on the health sector, actually union health budget, because you have heard quite a lot of the fiscal and the macro economy, but very little discussion on any sector. So I thought I'll throw some light on the what the union health budget does for the health sector. Next slide, please. No, the previous one. Yeah. Now, you see, it's often said, and rightly so, health is a state subject. Now, how does the health enter the union budget? Some historical background. One component, it's a central government health scheme introduced in 1954 for serving and retired central government employees. That's one expenditure which union government incurs. Then, of course, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, established in 1956 with the objective of produce the future leaders of Indian medicine and public health, the teachers and research workers. I'm quoting it because it's important. I'm not going to get into that issue because the discussion these days is, aims everywhere in every state, but the original aim or the objective of aims is, and that's what I have quoted over there. Then, of course, a number of central sector schemes to address TB, blindness, HIV/AIDS. But the major interventions, in fact, undertaken during UPA-1, that's a period between 2005 and 2008, the NRHM, Prime Minister's Swasthya Suraksha Yojana, then RSBY, which of course later became Ayushman Bharat. These are the areas through which the union government spends on health. Now, I just wish to spend 1 or 2 minutes on this National Rural Health Mission and the Prime Minister's Swasthya Suraksha Yojana. What does the NRHM do? Why was NRHM launched in 2005? In fact, to provide, there was this realization that provision of healthcare services in the rural areas was not up to the mark. And in fact, many states, you simply don't have that. So it is basically to provide affordable and quality healthcare to the rural population and make public health delivery system fully functional, decentralize the system, and achieve high standards and develop human resources at the lowest level. These were the major gaps which was observed at that point of time. So basically to fill that, the NRHM was launched in 2005. In 2006, you have Prime Minister Swasthya Suraksha Yojana, which sought to correct the imbalances in availability of tertiary care, because NRHM, the primary care, the public health, whereas the PMSSY, basically to address the imbalances in the tertiary care provision by setting up All India Institute of Medical Sciences and upgrading medical colleges. These are the two components which went into it. Then, as regards funding, NRHM was the major constituent and PMSSY was much smaller initially. Now, let us turn to the budget, the latest budget, to see how these have evolved. If you look at the numbers of central grant to the states or the central expenditure on health, then this is what you will find. Of course, the Finance Commission grants, health grants, I've shown it over there, and there is something ominous there. That is 2021 number, 21-22 actual, then 22-23 budget estimate, 22-23 revised estimate. Then you have the 23-24 budget estimate. That are the last two columns. Why I have given it twice, it will become clear in a minute. Now, if you look at that, you will find that the Finance Commission grants on health, these are fixed for each year, but then you find something ominous there. Last year's budget, it was 13,152, but whereas what is actually revised estimate, the first time I'm seeing that sort of thing, I don't understand that. In fact, I'm sure Govind Rao will have something to say on that. Then other grants, these are basically for vaccination, the COVID vaccination. So 21-22, the previous budget announced 35,000. They ended up spending 35,000 at 438. The next year, it was the budget announcement was 5,000, but they spent only about 967. I don't want to go into great details on this because this was purely sort of to face the COVID vaccination. Now, then you look at the other allocation is basically Ministry of Ayush, and on the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, you have two components: Department of Health and Family Welfare and DHR, Department of Health Research. Now, you would find that Ministry of Ayush, the numbers have steadily been going up. That is something like 2292 becomes 2359 the next year, that is 21-22. This again budgeted figure is about 25% higher. and the spending is also about 20% higher this year, that is 22-23. Again, a 20% increase in the budget provision the next year. Compared to the revised estimate, it's about 28% higher. That is as far as, so the Ministry of Ayush is well funded. Now let us come to the Ministry of, Health and Family Welfare. Now you look at 2021, the spending was 27,500 crores. Next budget, you have a figure of 81,000. But that is the actual spending in 21-22, which was slightly higher compared to the previous year. The budget next year, that is 22-23, was only 2% higher than the previous year. But look at the revised estimate. It is only 76,000 crores. It's actually lower than even 2021 figure. That is what you need to note. And next year, budget estimate, of course, is 86,000 crores. But going by this year's experience, you can very well imagine what would happen to the actual expenditure. Now, coming to the Department of Health Research, there is also something, quite ominous that is happening over there. You see, you look at 2021, firstly, the allocations have been going down, the total allocations, and the bulk of it, see, if you look at 2021, about 50% of that for ICMR. But you look at the next year, the total spending has actually gone down, but ICMR spending has gone up. That means Department of Health Research, almost entirely it is going for ICMR and nothing else. That's what is happening. Okay, this is the broad picture. Now let us look at the components, which are gaining and which are losing. Now, if you look at the basically health and family welfare, I've already covered Ayush, and I'm not going to touch the Department of Health Research any longer because that's also taken care of. So basically focusing on health and family welfare, what you find is that centers establishment expenditure, that's establishment plus all those hospitals in Delhi. That's what that component really includes. You would see that that is steadily sort of going up. So you see the compared to 2021, the next year it went up by slightly, but then the budgetary allocation for the next year goes up by 18%. Revised expenditure also goes up by 18%. The same sort of a trend continues as far as 23-24 is concerned. And then you have central sector schemes, that to control TB, blindness, a whole lot of those things, which was actually goes to the states. Now you look at that, what is happening is that a steady decline. That is 21,000. Next year, it's only 15,000. Budget estimate for the 22-23, 15,000. Revised is only less than 12,000. And next, now look at that 15 now has become 8, 50% drop. So central sector schemes are really starved of funds. They are not in the picture any longer. Then other central sector expenditure, that is basically, regulatory bodies and statutory bodies, that expenditure is going up. Then you have the autonomous bodies, that is All India Institute of Medical Sciences, JIPMER and a whole lot of those things. That you look at the last row, you see that that's actually increasing by 18-20% the last 2 years, but the next year's budget allocation has gone up by 70%. A huge increase for the AIIMS, basically AIIMS type institutions. What about National Health Mission? Now you see, it's actually showing, like the central sector schemes, the National Health Mission is also showing a picture where one, budget allocations are steadily going down. Second, expenditure compared to allocations is also falling course, 21-22 is slightly different, but otherwise, what you see is that it's actually not showing any increase. But look at Prime Minister's Ayushman Bharat Yojana. There is some increase, but that is a very small sum compared to the National Health Mission. So, total centrally sponsored schemes, what you find is that is not showing any significant increase. That's the overall picture. But of course, there is this large increase that you will see from 39,000 to 49,000 in 21-22. A percentage change of about 25%. That's largely because of there was this emergency sort of a response package given by the center of about 12,000 crores. If you discount that, in fact, there's practically no increase. That 39,000, hovers around with the next year's 22-23, the budgetary allocation is only about 41 sort of a, no, budgetary allocation was 47, but the spending was only about 41,000. Not a great increase from that 39 of 2021. So that is as far as the centrally sponsored schemes are concerned. So if I have to sum it up, I have something more to say, but this is summing up these numbers. The picture is that Ministry of Ayush has been getting a boost. And the Department of Health Research allocation has not risen, but ICMR has seen a 30% increase. The bulk of it is actually going to ICMR. Third, in the Department of Health and Family Welfare, centers, establishments, statutory organizations, and autonomous bodies, they have been seeing a steady increase. But central sector schemes, that is national programs, and they're basically transferred to the states, that is showing a steady decline, and National Health Mission is actually starved of funds. And not only starved of funds, but something else is happening. You look at central sector schemes, and then Pradhan Mantri Swasthya Suraksha Yojana. As I already showed you, central sector schemes, there has been a decline. In fact, a sharp decline in the next year's budget. That's the last column. A 50%, almost a 50% decline in the budgetary allocation. But look at Pradhan Mantri Swasthya Suraksha Yojana. It's a steady sort of increase the first 3 years, but then next year's allocation is of course lower. But so net central sector schemes, when I say net central sector schemes, it's basically what is going to the states. Now you look at the numbers. In fact, 2021, it was 15,000 crores. Now it is, the budgetary allocation for the next year is just about 5,000 crores. So over about 3 years, it has become just 1/3. That's a 2/3 sort of a fall. That is as far as the net central sector schemes are concerned. All those national programs, they get very little money. Second, if you look at the National Health Mission, I've already shown you the numbers and the trend. In fact, it is not going up. And within that, bulk of the, not bulk, there is a sizable increase taking place for establishment of medical colleges and increase in seats in medical colleges. So net, that NHM, if you deduct that for establishment of medical colleges and increasing the seats, what is really happening is that the National Health Mission, in fact, the allocation is showing a slow and steady decline. That is what you find. So both net central sector schemes as well as net NHM, that is if you deduct the allocation for the setting up of medical colleges and upgrading medical colleges, the other sort of programs, you practically, the allocation is coming down. Now, and Prime Minister's Swasthya Suraksha Yojana, what is it seeking to do? I just quoted it. Basically, as I mentioned earlier, it is seeking to put money in the tertiary care hospitals, AIIMS and other sort of upgradation of medical colleges to address tertiary care. Now, let me conclude. All that I have to do is very simply contrast the objectives of NRHM with that of Prime Minister's Swasthya Suraksha Yojana. What did NRHM seek to do? Make public health delivery system fully functional, decentralize the system with the community involvement, achieving high standards and develop human resources at the lowest level. That is what NRHM sought to do. Whereas Prime Minister's Swasthya Suraksha Yojana, it seeks to, so-called correcting the regional imbalances by making, affordable and elevate tertiary care. Basically, the focus is on tertiary care and quality medical education. So the numbers that I showed you is that NRHM, the allocation has steadily been coming down, whereas PMSSY has steadily been going up. So, in one word, in over 15 years, we are back to dumping primary care and fund more of tertiary care. This was often a criticism that whole medical thing is urban curative care was getting more money. That was the criticism. Now I think we are back to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that brings us to the end of the session today.
Please request whether Pinaki has anything to add.
Professor Pinaki Chakrabarti, would you like to add anything because you were cut off in the middle? Is he there?
Well, I thank you, Chairman, and I don't know when my connection got disconnected. So I think that was at the end, and I just wanted to conclude by saying that in Centre's fiscal consolidation roadmap, the revenue deficit has been estimated to be 2.9% of GDP, so around 3% of GDP. I think that's a very big correction that has been proposed. Now, if we look at Centre's interest burden, which is booked in the revenue account, that's 3.57% of GDP, so which is higher than the revenue deficit. And if we look at the centrally sponsored scheme, just now Dr. Narayana was talking about, aggregate, it is around 2. Now it has declined a bit. So together they are around 4.55% of GDP. So there are structural issues in revenue deficit. So, and there has been kind of underestimation. I think if we say we are also talking about revenue budget allocation for MGN, REGA, and other schemes in the both economic and social sectors under centrally sponsored scheme. This has been at the estimate level, it has been kept low because probably government wanted to show a lower level of revenue deficit. At the same time, it also has to be noted that in 2019-20, India's tax to GDP ratio was 9.8%. I'm talking about the gross tax revenue. Today, it is 11.1. So there has been 1.3 percentage point increase in the tax to GDP ratio. Even if we take the actual of 21-22, there has been 1.1 percentage point increase. So I hope this increasing tax to GDP ratio in 3 years by more than 1 percentage point is significant, but it has to continue. Whether that will continue in the next year is a question, and their conservative revenue estimates plays a role because we are going to, if the inflation is high and economy is growing at a little higher rate, then probably we'll have a higher tax. And given that revenue buoyancy is low, we might get little more, we have a little more extra fiscal space. So that's the assumption. So the revenue deficit continues to remain a challenge, and if it is not reduced, then this will have an impact on the capital expenditure. So I stop at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, would any of the students like to ask any question?
I promise a dinner for anybody who asks a question. Yeah.
Sir, I think let them start thinking.
I'll just raise a couple of questions. I thought we are discussing both economic survey and the budget because conceptually, and one could think in terms of budget as a set of prescriptions in a way coming out of the economic survey, that is the diagnostics of the economy as presented by the government. If we conceive like that, I would say that economic survey was in a sense doing injustice in the sense that it is too much dealing with what is called, if I call Professor Suresh Babu's word in terms of dealing in laurels, in the sense that instead of highlighting what are the basic problems in the economy, for example, we wanted to be a 5 trillion economy, we need to have another 2 years, at least 19-20% growth rate to reach that. We cannot reach. Now, at least we should try to aim at third largest economy of the world. And what will be the nature and character of that third largest economy, the manner in which your growth is conceived. Look at at the similar stage, what China has done. China had very concrete initiatives in terms of emerging as the leader in all sense, including in the high technology. And that is the reason where they are today. Today, what we see, for example, they are looking. I mean, there are different strategies, like a torch program. In terms of specifically looking at the minorities, all kinds of things. Incidentally, in the opening paragraph of the minister, we didn't hear the word minority at all. All inclusion was there, not minority. Now the question is, if you consider the finance minister as a doctor, there might be. If you consider if the economic survey had given the basic problems of the economy, she would have needed to give some antibiotic. She would have given some paracetamol or something like a painkiller. And third, of course, some kind of vitamins. What we find here is that you have an approach towards what is called antibiotic. That is more in the Hirschman sense, the social overhead capital, but the directly productive investment. That to what extent we are actually, we are aiming at, that is doubtful. That is because of the over-optimism that the economy has gone back to the pre-pandemic level. That pre-pandemic level is a rate of growth of 3.8%. Don't forget that has come down over 5 years from 8% to 3.8%. That level you have come, and you are happy that you will reach where we want to reach in terms of 5 trillion and the third largest economy. And what will be the nature of that third largest economy with so many poor? What will be the nature of distribution? That's something which one has to really look at it. Now, they also think that there is an apparent approach that it is the center that is going to drive the economy where you want to drive. And what is the share of states? It was actually 33% in 2021-22. Now it is 30%. If I remember, 89,000. Look at the receipt table. And how can you justify? While you are thinking that you are going to the economy to very high, ambitious thing. How can you expect this? So I have these two questions. I have to know what is the kind of that balance between, for example, particularly because you all acknowledge that we are going to have a very, what is called a recessionary condition in the rest of the world, that there will be demand constraint from the external side. Export is not going to boost your economy. Naturally, you have to create your domestic demand.
And with an MNREGA, your agriculture sector is almost kind of neglected in that sense of the term, where the demand is going to come for the short-term growth. While you aim at long-term, well, all these capex will take time if at all it is coming. So where is the paracetamol? You have, please, that's it.
You are addressing or
This is generally.
anyone can answer.
I'm concerned about the declining share by 3%, 33% to 30%. I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about what is the short-term revival strategy which we see while we aim at high. What is the short-term revival strategy? Do you think that states have been neglected?
Just one
Very
point
brief answer. I will give a very brief answer.
with respect.
If I may.
Saying,
Hello?
hello,
I'll
sir.
give a very brief answer to Dr. Joseph. I mean, on the first part of the question, Chandrasekhar in his initial remarks has already said, there is hardly any relationship between the economic survey and what happens in the budget. In fact, throughout the period, you will see that, in fact, these are working, they seem to work in silos. And it is not yesterday's or today's. And obviously, economic survey wants to project good things, because even 6.5% GDP growth is, IMF says that we are going to grow it to 6%. There are issues of that nature. So obviously, don't link the two. See them as independent things. And on the second, Professor Joseph, your answer lies in the question itself. You say that the states are important, but says that attributes the problem. The issue is that 66% or 70% of the expenditure is to be incurred by the center. Everything cannot be done by the state. Done by the states. Everything cannot be done by the center. So you do need to understand this particular issue, that this is center is only supposed to give the signal. Now, as far as your $5 trillion economy is concerned, I think, given that we've had 2 years of holiday in growth, in fact, 2.8% growth in the last 3 years. No, obviously there will be shifting of that thing. Whether the $5 trillion, that's an aspirational target. Whether that you'll be able to reach or not, it is not that. But it is sort of putting it there so that you see people try to think about growth. Uttar Pradesh has come out with, every day there is an advertisement, $1 trillion economy. Now, obviously, under no circumstances, my good friend Arvind Pargadia said that this particular thing just cannot be done. Under no, the economy has to grow at the rate of 32%. You can't do that. You can't have that much of investment. But then that's a sort of a thing. And wherever you can reach, you reach. And that's where you have to start. And then again, central budget, ultimately growth depends upon the volume of investment and the institutional factors, and which also determine the productivity. Now, central budget alone cannot set all these things. Institutional factors are given elsewhere. And how much, even in other ways, much of the growth, investment that have come in the past, in the state is rather than the. This is all that I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Govindra. I generally want to know whether the students want to say something, or they're satisfied with what they've heard. So, are you all completely fatigued? Anyway.
Could I respond to Professor Joseph's question? A quick response?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think there is a boost in terms of domestic demand, which is coming from two important allocations. One is the increased allocation in terms of Jal Jeevan Mission. Second is the increased allocation in terms of the Prime Minister Housing Scheme. So the whole idea behind reducing this whole or not increasing the MNREGA allocation is precisely because these two are expected to increase jobs. And if it is not, then at that point, perhaps we can increase MNREGA. So I think when you look at the fine print, these are the two important allocations which have really increased, and these are supposed to create jobs. So I would say the paracetamol is not maybe Dolo 650, but at least there is something, at least, Dolo 450 there. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you very much. I would like to thank on my behalf all the learned participants, the panelists who participated in this meeting. I think it was very productive in the sense that you covered different areas. You generally were satisfied, I think, with the revenue projections. On policy issues and the impact, there were some differences. But overall, this was a good discussion, and I hope the students have really benefited, because we could not have got a better panel of experts. So with that, may I request Mr. Riju Mohan, Miss Riju Mohan, to Research Scholar of GIFT, to give the vote of thanks.
As we come to the completion of this panel discussion, I deem it a great honor to propose a vote of thanks to all those who've participated in this panel discussion for their wholehearted cooperation and contribution. First, I would like to thank the torch bearer of this panel discussion, our respected director, Professor KJ Joseph, for leading and inspiring us in working towards the goal of successful completion of this program. We are thankful to him for his huge support at all times. We're extremely privileged to have the esteemed presence of Shri K.M. Chandrasekhar, former Cabinet Secretary of the Government of India and Distinguished Fellow of GIFT, who chaired the panel discussion. On behalf of GIFT, I would like to extend my profound gratitude to the Honorable Chair for his invaluable presence and contribution to this event. We are extremely happy to air our deep sense of appreciation and gratitude to Professor M. Govinda Rao, former Director of NIPFP and Distinguished Fellow of GIFT, for his excellent opening remarks to the discussion. A very special thanks to you, sir. The outstanding features of the outcome of the panel discussion are the valuable insights that we have gained from the experiences and teachings of the eminent panelists who have galaxied here. We have had an enlightening line of panelists discussing the varied aspects of the Union Budget and Economic Survey over panel discussions. Our sincere gratitude to Professor R. Nagaraj, Professor Pinaki Chakrabarti, Professor M. Suresh Babu, Professor Lekha Chakrabarti, Dr. A.V. Jose, and Professor D. Narayana. It has been an honor to have them on the panel, and our privilege to thank all these distinguished speakers for sparing their time for enlightening us with their insightful discussion on the subject. Our gratitude to all the online participants for their active participation and input. Our very special thanks to the seminar coordinators, Dr. Kiran Kumar Kakarlapudi and Dr. Anup S. Kumar, and the faculty members of GIFT for their sincere efforts in coordinating and managing the program. Our deep gratitude to the IT team and the non-academic staff of GIFT for their boundless support in the successful completion of this program. Thanks also to the research scholars of GIFT and the other participants for their active cooperation and involvement. We thank you all for being with us this morning. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.